What's up, guys? This is Sean with Plus Money Media. I'm back with more UFC picks for this weekend's event, UFC 273, Korean Zombie versus Volkanovski. So the first fight is going to be Daniel Santos versus Julio Arce. Julio Arce is going to have the experience advantage. He's a little bit of a veteran in the UFC. Meanwhile, Daniel Santos is making his debut. Santos is a bit of a wild striker. He's a little bit more dangerous earlier in the fight. For this one, I didn't personally place any bets, but I was considering placing a prop bet for this one not to go the distance at plus 115, as well as another prop bet for Arce to win by decision at plus 140. I was probably going to go with about a unit on each of those, which would have led to a profit unless Daniel Santos were to win by decision. Because Santos is so unpredictable, and since he hasn't gone up against the kind of experience that he's going to be dealing with now, I thought it's safer to stay away from this one on the off chance that he is able to pull off a decision victory. The next fight on the card is going to be Hansen versus Piera Rodriguez. Rodriguez is undefeated at 7-0 with 5 knockouts and 2 decision wins. She's making her UFC debut, but she did look good in her Contender Series fight. Hansen will have the experience advantage in this one and perhaps the grappling advantage, but in my opinion, she's a little bit too inconsistent for me to judge this one. Hansen could end up looking like an experienced vet and just shutting down Rodriguez's attacks, or Rodriguez could get a knockout in the first round. This one is just too unpredictable, so I personally didn't go with the bet on this one either. I was leaning towards Rodriguez just because Hansen has been slipping as of late, but like I said, she's making her debut, so there's just too many factors and it's a little bit too unpredictable for me. The next fight on the card is going to be Anthony Hernandez versus Josh Fremd. Both of these guys are finishers. Rarely do their fights go the distance whether they win or lose. Fremd is making his UFC debut, and frankly I think he's a little bit more well-rounded, but as we've seen, Hernandez is always dangerous. He is super tough and he can submit you from pretty much anywhere. This is another one that I wasn't confident enough to bet on, but I was leaning towards the underdog in Josh Fremd. I think he has a decent shot to win this fight, and at plus 165, that's a decent price. There were a couple other props that caught my eye on this one. For this one to go the full distance, it would pay out at plus 285, which, like I said, both of these guys are finishers, but sometimes in those matchups, we end up seeing a long drawn-out war that ends up in a decision. And some other options were Hernandez by submission at plus 200, or Hernandez in round 2 at plus 450. That last one is a little bit of a wild card, but I think Fremd will be too tough to get finished in the first round, and almost all of Anthony Hernandez's wins come before the third round starts. If you do end up betting on Josh Fremd, I would recommend betting a unit, perhaps a little bit more. For the other prop bets, you can go a little bit less, like 3/4 of a unit or half a unit. But again, this one was a little bit too close to call for me. There's too many variables and it's a little bit too unpredictable, which some of these prelim fights are like that. So the next fight on the card is going to be Aleksei Oleinik versus Vanderaa, and this one will actually have some action out there. I feel really good about Oleinik in this one. He's a UFC vet with 45 pro submissions. Aleksei Oleinik doesn't have the most power in his hands, but he is a bit of a wild striker and he uses it well to set up the grappling scenarios. And we haven't really seen much from Vanderaa after his win on the Contender Series. He was able to hold down Justin Tafa, but I don't see him being able to do that to Aleksei Oleinik. Aleksei Oleinik will always be a danger to submit his opponent in any fight that he's in, and on the off chance that this one does go the distance, it'll pay out 6-1 odds for Oleinik to win. These are going to be my 2 bets on this match. I'm going to go with half a unit on the decision prop and 1.5 on the submission prop. What this means is my net profit will be a unit and a half if he wins by decision and 1.9 units if he wins by submission. I'm also going to throw him on a few parlay tickets, just because I think this is a great matchup for him, like I said. And we'll get to some of these parlay ticket examples at the end of the video. Next fight on the card is going to be Mike Mallot versus Mickey Gall. This one is similar to some of the other fights we've covered. We have a young up-and-coming prospect with a little bit of excitement behind him who looked fantastic on his Contender Series fight versus a veteran with a little bit more UFC experience. Against Alex Morono, his striking looked a lot better, and he recently moved to Sanford MMA, which is probably a big reason behind that. Both of these guys do have submission skills. In my opinion, Mallot looks like more of an athlete. He looks a little bit faster, more twitchy, and Mickey Gall is a lot taller with longer reach. This was another one that I wasn't able to pull the trigger on, at least by this point, just because when some of these people are making their debut, it's really tough to know how they're going to handle it. But I was leaning on the underdog in Mickey Gall with the experience in the UFC, and at plus 165, I definitely don't think it's a bad bet at all. You can even do sort of a semi-hedge and add another bet for this one to go the full distance. Of course, there's a chance these both hit, but even if only one of these hits, you still make a little bit of a profit. That prop bet will pay out at plus 190, which is a pretty good deal, because I do think this one has a decent chance to go the distance. I was thinking about throwing about a unit on Mickey Gall and about 3/4 of a unit on this one to go the full distance. That way, the only way you lose is if Mallot wins by decision, which I don't really see happening. But again, I did not place a bet on this one, at least at the point of filming this video. But if I do end up betting this one, this is how I will do it. The next one on the card is Aspen Ladd versus Raquel Pennington, and I think this is going to be a great fight for us this weekend. Raquel Pennington looked amazing in her last fight. She got a finish in the second round against Macy Chiasson. She's only been finished in her career by Amanda Nunes, and she really is a true gatekeeper in that division. Aspen Ladd has had weight issues, and she's kind of an undersized featherweight for that reason. We saw in her last fight she got dominated a little bit by Norma Dumont, and Pennington is really just a bully, man. If it goes the distance, she always almost wins a decision, and now we're seeing her start to finish girls again. At minus 190, I think that's actually a great price. I think Raquel Pennington should be at minus 250 or more. So she will definitely be on most of the parlay tickets that I placed this weekend. And we'll go over the full list of parlay picks as well as ticket examples at the end of the video. But because I'm so confident in Pennington in this one, I am going to bank on her to get the finish. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit on her knockout prop as well as her submission prop. For Pennington to win by submission, it will pay out at plus 550. And I'm going to bet about half a unit on that. For her to win by knockout, it will actually pay out at plus 1,000. And I'm going to go with about 1/4 to a half a unit on that one. Each one of those would get you at least 2 units of profit. And again, Pennington is going to be on most of our parlays, so even if she wins by decision, we will still net a profit for this fight. Next fight on the card is Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Marcin Tybura. Jairzinho will have a clear striking advantage in technique and power. He's a bit of a fan favorite, so his proposition to win by knockout wasn't that juicy. At plus 110, I didn't think it was worth the squeeze in this one, especially since Tybura is such a well-rounded fighter. If you really think about it, he can win in all 3 ways in this one. He can get a knockout in a ground and pound scenario, he can get a submission, or he can win by decision if he can control the grappling. I really think either Jairzinho is going to get the knockout like he always does when he wins, or Tybura will be able to take him down and kind of deal with all of it in that way. But I really didn't think this one was worth the squeeze. It wasn't juicy enough for me to risk it, so I did not place a bet on this one. Alright, next one on the card is Ian Garry versus Darian Weeks. Ian Garry is looking like he's going to be that next hyped prospect, or at least he's trying to be. He's an Irish dude with crispy striking, which we've all seen, everybody loves that. He's 8-0 with 5 knockouts and 1 submission. And we saw in his UFC debut, he had a beautiful one-punch knockout, him just kind of sliding back, counter hook. Darian Weeks is a pretty good striker in his own right. He has pro boxing fights on his record. And Ian Garry will also have a pretty big height and reach advantage. Darian Weeks is known to swing a bit wild, and I think with Ian Garry being such a slick counter striker, it will be a good matchup for Garry. In these type of fights, I always expect the UFC to sort of nurture their growing star and kind of give him choice matchups and build his name up. And I think there's a chance that could be happening here. I'm not saying Weeks is an easy fight, but I do think Ian Garry matches up well. I placed 2 prop bets on this one for Garry to win in round 2 and another for him to win by decision. The round 2 prop will pay out at plus 450, while the decision prop will pay out at plus 240. I went with these ones more so based on price. He does get a lot of finishes in round 1, but I'm hoping that Weeks will be tough enough to outlast that. And since Weeks has only lost by decision, there's a chance that he is just educated enough as a striker where he can protect himself through the whole fight, even if he's losing. So I went with just under half a unit for him to win in round 2 and just over half a unit for him to win by decision. If either of these happens, you'll get a net profit of about 1 unit to a unit and a quarter, somewhere in that range depending on which one of these hit. And I'm also going to ride the hype train to a degree a little bit, just sprinkle Ian Garry on a few parlays, maybe 2 or 3 tickets, just to dip my toes in the water. Because like I said before, the UFC will try to build guys' names up, so I do think there's a chance of that happening here. At minus 375, it's not the safest bet, so that's why I'm only going to throw him on a few tickets. The next one is going to be Mark Madsen versus Vince Pichel. In this one, we're looking at more of a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Both of these guys are in their late 30s. but Mark Madsen is undefeated, and he's a very highly decorated wrestler. He has an Olympic silver medal and an insane streak of gold medals in the Denmark Wrestling National Championships. Vince Pichel's only 2 losses were also to wrestlers, so I do think this is an interesting matchup. Madsen is also undefeated at 11-0, so I'm heavily leaning towards Madsen in this one. He has 3 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 5 wins by decision. All 6 of his finishes were in the first round, so it seems like he'll either swarm the guy early or just control him for the entire fight. Vince Pichel does have 8 knockouts, but I just think the stars are aligning for Mark Madsen to win this one. For Madsen to win in round 1, it will pay out at plus 800, which I think is a fantastic price. For him to win by decision, it will pay out at plus 225, which I also think is a great price. I also sprinkled $5 for him to win in the 3rd round, which will actually pay out at plus 1800, believe it or not. On the chance that he is controlling Vince Pichel late into the fight and he's tiring him out, maybe he can get a stoppage in that round, and I'm here for it. I went with 3/4 of a unit on the decision prop and a little bit less than half a unit on the round 1 prop. If any of these happen, they will pay out at 1, 2, or more than 3 units of net profit, depending on which one happens. On the chance that Madsen wins in the 2nd round and all 3 of our props burn, we will be protected by our parlay tickets. Since I'm leaning so heavily on Madsen, I'm going to throw him on quite a few of my tickets, and at the end of the day, we just need him to win. We don't care how or when. These prop bets are just kind of a bonus. I really think Madsen is going to handle this one, but if he does lose, it will be a bit of a bad beat for this weekend. At plus 110, he's actually an underdog in this one, so I think we're getting a fantastic price. It will just be about how well he executes and how he actually looks out there. So the next one up the card is Mackenzie Dern versus Tecia Torres. I think this is going to be a really interesting one. Tecia Torres is kind of a short little tornado of muscle. She's fast and strong and athletic. And Mackenzie Dern is just high-level jiu-jitsu, just jiu-jitsu royalty. Torres has never been submitted, and pretty much all of her fights go the distance. Her losses tend to go the distance, and most of her victories go the distance. Mackenzie Dern has 7 wins by submission, and the rest of her fights, win and loss, have all gone the distance. In this one, I'm actually sort of leaning Tecia Torres. I do think it will be hard for Mackenzie to take her down. Her wrestling isn't that great. She's mainly known for like pulling guard, or in a scramble she'll start grappling. Tecia Torres is also a veteran, and she's really experienced and strong, so I really think it will be hard for Mackenzie to take her down. Tecia should also have a pretty clear advantage on the feet with the striking. I personally just went with 2 prop bets on this one, just a little bit of a hedge play. I went with Torres to win by decision and Mackenzie to win by submission. MGM will pay you plus 250 for Dern to win by submission, which I think is a fantastic price. For Torres to win by decision, it will pay out at plus 160, which I think is a pretty decent price. I don't see either of these girls knocking each other out. I don't see Tecia Torres getting a submission, and personally, I don't see Mackenzie winning by decision. I threw a little bit less than 1 unit on Mackenzie Dern to win by submission at plus 250, which again, I think is a fantastic price when it comes to her likelihood of getting a submission. For Torres to win by decision at plus 160, I went with 1 full unit, and I think it's a really safe bet. Either of these will net just under 1 unit in profit if they win, so I definitely feel good about this one. Alright, so for the next one on the card, it's going to be the people's main event, Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. Khamzat is 10-0 with 5 knockouts and 5 submissions, most of which being in the first round. He fights at welterweight and middleweight, whereas Gilbert Burns used to actually be a lightweight, so there should be a pretty significant size disadvantage for Gilbert Burns. Burns' main weapon is jiu-jitsu, but he hasn't been getting the same amount of submissions at welterweight. In my opinion, that's because he's evolved his game. He's, developed his striking more and his wrestling, and sometimes he's just willing to outpoint you and control you nowadays instead of risking it all for a submission. But apparently Khamzat has never been tapped in training, or at least that's what his coaches and himself are saying, which would be quite a weird thing to lie about. Khamzat is going to have a height and reach advantage, and I also think a speed and strength advantage. I even think he's going to have a cardio advantage. So I just think it's a tough go for Gilbert Burns. I'm a big fan of Gilbert Burns. I love his fighting style. I think he's a real threat in this division. But from what I can see, Khamzat is the real deal. I expect him to finish this fight, and he's going to be on almost all of my parlays. As far as prop bets, I went with 2 different ones. Khamzat to win by submission and Khamzat to win in the second round will both pay out at 3-1 odds, which I think are pretty great prices. I think everyone's expecting a first round knockout more than anything, but If we do know Khamzat, he is known to do something unexpected, and I think he will like to submit Gilbert Burns. That way he can say he tapped out the jiu-jitsu guy. And on the other hand, Gilbert Burns is for sure Khamzat's toughest opponent to this point. I wouldn't be surprised if Khamzat can't get him out of there in the first round and Gilbert Burns is too tough. There's a chance that that is the case, and by the second round he's just so tired that that's when the finish comes. So that's why I went with the round 2 along with the price. For him to win by knockout or for him to win in the first round were not as juicy, so that's what kind of led me down this path. I went with a little bit more than half a unit on each of these. And of course, this is a semi-hedge, so one of these can hit and I'll still make a profit, or of course there's a chance of them both hitting, which is, obviously the best outcome. Like I said before, I love Gilbert Burns, but I just don't see any way he wins this fight. I really think Khamzat is going to roll through him. So the next one of the card is going to be the co-main event, Petr versus Aljamain Sterling. For the Bantamweight Championship rematch. Jan is a finisher. Usually he finishes people late in fights. He likes to make you work and wear you down and then get a nasty finish towards the end of the fight. He sort of bullies you, makes you use your energy. He can out-grapple you. He can strike with you. Aljamain is a fast starter. He kind of swarms you in the beginning of a fight, and that's more his style. So I do think there's an interesting dichotomy there. I think Jan will have a pretty clear advantage in the striking, and from what we saw in the last fight, I do think he even has an advantage in the grappling. I think he has better use of his energy, and he's more efficient with his output than Aljamain is as well. And with all that's gone on, I really think he's going to be motivated to find the finish. Sterling is a great fighter, and before this whole belt fiasco, I was a pretty big fan of him as well. But I just don't think he's on the same level as Petr Yan, just from what I saw in that first fight. Now, of course, Aljamain did have a neck injury, which has been fixed since then, and apparently he did have a really rough weight cut going into that one. But again, I just think Petr Yan was on his way to outclassing Aljo in that first one. I think we're going to see a late finish, maybe a knockout on the feet while they're tired and sloppy, or a ground and pound finish, maybe some sort of a choke. But yeah, I definitely see Petr Yan winning this fight, and I do see him finding the finish. As I mentioned before, Petr Yan likes to make you work and kind of bully you into a slow, brutal finish. So what I did is I went with round betting, rounds 3, 4, and 5 for him to win by finish, 3 individual prop bets, which pay out at plus 900, plus 1200, and plus 1600. At those ridiculous numbers, if either of them hit, there's still going to be a good-sized profit. And this is definitely the outcome that I think we were on our way to seeing in their last fight. I'm going to throw Petr Yan on enough parlay tickets to where even if he wins in the first or second round or by decision, there's still going to be a net profit. I'm very confident in him to win this fight, so he will be one of my more chalkier picks. I put half a unit for Petr Yan to win in the third round and a little bit less than half a unit for him to win in rounds 4 and 5 each. Basically, if he wins in the third or fourth round, I will go up more than 3.5 units. And if he wins in that fifth and final round, I will go up more than 5 units. And that's not including the parlay tickets. So yeah, definitely really confident in Petr Yan in this one. I think it's a chalky pick. I would feel really safe betting like this. And you can probably also parlay a few tickets featuring the prop bet for this one to start the third round. It's going to be minus 420 for this one to start the third round. Like I said before, Petr Yan is usually a later finisher, and I don't think Aljo's early storm will work on him. So I do think we will see that third round. But again, I'm definitely going to have Petr Yan on more tickets. All right, so finally for our main event, Alexander Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie for the Featherweight UFC Championship. In this one, I think we all know Volkanovski is a heavy favorite for a reason. He's been storming through a lot of these guys. He's beaten Max Holloway twice, and I think we all know that MMA math doesn't work, but Brian Ortega was able to dominate Korean Zombie and kind of got dominated himself by Alexander Volkanovski. Korean Zombie will always be a huge threat, but he might be a little bit outside of his prime. Volkanovski is more of a decision fighter, but I do think he has a chance of getting a ground and pound finish, or maybe like a cardio type pace finish where it happens late in the fight and Zombie's a bit tired out. If Zombie wins this fight, it will be by finish. He will hurt him with his hands, and that will either lead to a choke, like a Darce choke, or it will lead to a ground and pound finish. That's the only way that I see Korean Zombie winning this fight. For Zombie to win by knockout, it will pay out at plus 900, and for him to win by submission, it will pay out at plus 1200. Like our round betting props in the co-main event, these are fantastic prices. I put right around 2 units on each of these, which will lead to a profit of more than 3.5 units, or more than 4.5, depending on which of these hit. And if Volkanovski wins, which is what I'm expecting in this one, and both of these prop bets lose, I will still be safe due to my parlays. There's some really safe picks like Chimaev, Petr, or Raquel Pennington that you can parlay with Volkanovski, which will lead to enough profit to offset these two prop bets. So we will win money unless Korean Zombie wins by decision, which again, I don't see that happening. Here's the list of all the parlay picks that I'm going with. I have them in order of confidence. So the ones towards the top of the list are going to be featured on more parlays or for higher dollar amounts or both, and then vice versa for the bottom of the list. You can see the odds next to the picks. They may have changed by the time you're viewing this video, but you can use this list to form your parlay tickets for Saturday. Here are some examples of some parlay tickets that you can make. Some pay out more than others, some are a little bit riskier than others, but I do think there's some solid value that you'll be able to find in this list. But that's going to cut it for this week's betting picks. I think we're set up for a nice weekend. I think there's some really chalky favorites, some live dogs, and some really decent props. We got to bounce back and get back in the winning column following our last UFC outing. I think it was Blaydes versus Daukaus. It wasn't my best night, but like I said, we're set up for a nice bounce back. Usually pay-per-views are where I make most of my money anyways, and I'll see you guys at the window.